Hi, I'm Ria. Welcome to It's the Audacity for Me, a personal development podcast that's a little different than most. This show is for anyone who's tired of the hustle mentality, but also recognizes that not everything is love and light. I'm here to help guide you to a more sustainable life that's in tune with nature, but also to help you see the light already inside of you. I can't wait to see you in this week's episode. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to It's the Audacity for Me. This week's episode is another super special one. I was so excited to have the opportunity to speak with another TikTok friend, Dsouza, known on TikTok as the Dsouza Mindset. We've been TikTok friends for quite a while now, and I believe we started our pages around the same time. I love his fresh perspective on so many different issues and how he's willing to be real and show his authentic self, which has been so beneficial for so many others. His bio on TikTok says, healthy lifestyle habits serve with a positive mindset, and I really believe that's the perfect description. I love that while he's a super positive person, he's also willing to recognize when things are just crappy. I originally reached out to Dean to have him on the podcast because I wanted to ask more about his experience with immigrating to the U.S. from India, then from the U.S. to Canada. While I have been incredibly privileged to have had the opportunity to travel outside of the U.S., I know many Americans do not or have not had this opportunity. Having Dean on the podcast shed light on so many different things that I wasn't even aware of, and through our discussion, I really learned a lot about the immigration process. I'm hoping you guys will too. Although this was the original topic, we covered so much more, like the polarity we see in society, the impacts of toxic positivity, and the pros and cons of social media like TikTok. It was such a wonderful experience having the chance to chat with Dean. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Thank you again for coming onto the podcast today. Can you introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hey, my name is Dean. I have a little channel called the Dsouza Mindset where I talk about my life lessons and the things I've learned being from a different part of the world. First and foremost, I am an immigrant. I've moved across 2 countries, tried to start life over. I was originally from India, and then I moved to the United States for about 7 years, and most recently moved to Canada for the last year and a half, I want to say.
Okay.
That I am, yeah.
So what led you to America to begin with? What led you to decide to leave your country?
I never really fit in with my country. There are many reasons for it. I was just introverted growing up. But another huge barrier was just that I had trouble learning new languages. There's a term for it's xenoglossophobia, it's called. So I had a foreign language anxiety. So I just, my parents tried to teach me growing up. I just wouldn't learn. I would just stick to English. So I was without learning languages in India, and India has 30 or 40 unique languages based on the state you're in. So it's really hard to kind of fit in if you don't speak that, right?
Wow, so, I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah. Every state has its own dialect and it's different. Yeah, you could be in the north, south, east. It's all completely different. My parents speak 7 languages, and each of them speaks 7 different languages. So,
oh wow,
which is very interesting. Yeah,
I can understand anxiety around that. That's making me anxious trying to comprehend having to know that many different languages. But that's awesome.
So I kind of growing up, I always gravitated towards the Western culture. I was just always watching movies and stuff, and I was I want to be there. I feel I'll be better off there. And so when I was 23, I was decided to do my higher education in the States. So that was the first reason for coming through. I was I don't want to spend too much time in India now. I'm okay, I feel I can do a little bit better abroad.
Okay. So you mentioned movies and kind of getting sort of an idea of what it might be like. Were there any specific movies that you gravitated towards that gave you more of an idea of what life might be like in America?
Oh, that's a good question. Was a lot of high school based stuff. I can't remember the top, but I remember High School Musical was pretty fun. That was one of the first enjoy ones. I used to watch a lot of Disney shows and Nickelodeon shows. So that kind of got me into the life of what because I was a kid and teenager around that time, right? So I was this is what school life is like out here. This is what kids do out there. And then I think as for adulthood came in, I would start seeing Friends or Desperate Housewives and stuff. And I'm this is how the adults in America are. So that kind of got me I want to have that life. I want to see what that's about.
Okay. I teach online with a few different companies. One of the companies I teach with, I'll work with adults from around the world, and you'd be surprised how often the show Friends comes up. Like, it is just, this is a global phenomenon. So that's funny you said Friends too.
I completely can't believe that though. Like, I've recently had a few of my friends who came to America during COVID, and then they were pretty shocked because they also grew up on that Friends impression. And my friend literally told me this is not like what Friends is at all, and I'm like, yep.
This is not Friends at all. We are not happily pivoting couches in hallways.
Yeah.
So, what was it like coming to the U.S.? What was the immigration process like for you?
So I went through like the educational platform. So that was basically, in a sense, I was doing my master's degree.
Okay.
So it's just, we applied to a bunch of colleges. I think I applied to 10 or 12 colleges. I had like my safety school, my dream colleges, things like that. Finally, I think I landed on like 2 or 3, and I picked the one I wanted to go to, which was North Carolina State in Raleigh.
Okay.
And once that was done, it was the thing with immigration is it also is a little expensive. So you kind of need to have like money ready. You need to show like assets. You need to kind of have like semester tuition fee ready and paid up, stuff like that. So the year before you leave is kind of the year when you kind of have to start doing all that, because once you have that ready, you have to go for like a visa interview. And during that interview, they will determine if you are eligible to leave the country or not. Like, do you have enough funding? Do you have like a good like background, a good educational background? Are you someone who can actually go there and survive? Are you planning to come back to India? Are you going to just leave the country forever? So all of this is kind of determined in your interview. And because of this, like, it's mostly after coming here, I realized it's very much like, at least for Asians, it's mostly like a business-based relationship with India and the States, where, we're contributing heavily to the education system here. So the higher education system here. So we kind of like have that agreement that, okay, if you're able to like afford the tuition fees and, you're willing to work here in this economy, then you can kind of come through.
Okay. So it's almost more of like, I don't necessarily want to say a partnership, but
in a sense,
like a working relationship.
Yeah, because they know like Asians are usually pretty hardworking. We're Dsouza. We don't really complain much. We know like it's grateful to come here from where we are. So we kind of really do our best to stay here and improve as much as we can here.
Okay. So would you say that let me back up. How long was it from the point where you decided, okay, this is what I want to do, to the time when you actually were able to immigrate?
So it's different with the US and with Canada. Like, each one was different. So with the United States, it took about a year.
Okay.
1 year. And with Canada, it was a little bit more. Between deciding an immigration with Canada, it took about 2.5 years.
Okay, so would you say it was harder to get into Canada, or was it just the way the timeline was set up?
Currently, it's very hard. Like, I know, because I have a lot of people trying to come through and they can't because the rules have gotten strict. When I kind of applied, so I started in 2019, deciding to come through for Canada. And then you have to give a bunch of exams. You have to start saving money, things like that. Mm-hmm. So the application form itself, I filed on December 2019. And just 3 months later, like, lockdowns and pandemic happened, right?
Oh, no.
So that kind of like put everything on hold, because usually it takes 6 months for your application once you submit it for it to be approved. But because of the pandemic, that got delayed like a year.
Okay. So, and we're still seeing that, I think, around the board.
Yeah. There was no border action at all for the entirety of the year. So basically by December 2020, I was like, okay, you're going to Canada. That was when I got to know. And then it took me 6 months after that to actually leave the States. I had to like wrap up on my affairs there and stuff like that.
Okay. So it wasn't, I guess I don't want to trick anybody into thinking that immigrating is easy one way or the other. Would you agree?
Oh, no. It requires a lot of, like, I'm very grateful to be in a position where, I'm well educated. Like, I was able to save up the money. I had a good paying job and, had like a nomination and stuff like that. But otherwise, in general, it is a lot. Like, people just can't get up and emigrate. Like, you really need a lot of things in place. Canada's also got like a points-based system. I don't know if you know about this.
Mm-mm.
So basically, they'll ask you a bunch of questions, and each question, the way you answer, gives you a certain amount of points. So if you have like a bachelor's degree, you get maybe 50 points. But if you have a master's degree, you get 100 points.
Oh, wow.
Like that, there's a lot of different questions. And every month they have this lottery system where they're like, this month, anybody over 500 points, we'll give them an invite. Next month, anyone over 480 points, we give them an invite. So every month, that the cutoff point changes, and based on where you are on that score, they'll let you in.
It sounds like you need a master's degree just to work all of the, I mean, I think...
It depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Because if you're from America or from Europe and stuff like that, it's easier. Like, people from Germany and stuff, like, it's pretty easy. So it depends on how Canada has a relationship with the different countries around it. So with India and China, we have a lot of population, a lot of people trying to come through, right? So that's why it's a little bit more stricter on our end. But if you've got an American passport and stuff, then it's like, oh, Canada and America have a good, like, relationship. It's a back and forth. So sometimes it's easier with that sense.
That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people, especially if they haven't been in a position where they've even considered immigration, I don't think that they necessarily realize how these countries' policies could affect you as an individual, depending, where you're going or where you're trying to leave from. But also, I don't think the average person in the U.S. really understands the barriers to entry, whether it's to the U.S. or to Canada.
Oh, yeah.
So what would you say if somebody was in the U.S. now trying to leave? What tips would you give them?
So it depends a lot on, first of all, if you have your passport. I know a lot of Americans don't, which is something that needs to first get on place. Secondly, you kind of need to make sure that, another thing that people from the U.S. should know is that even if you do immigrate, you will always pay U.S. taxes.
Okay.
Like, this is just like a lifelong thing. I don't have to pay taxes back in India, but even if you go to US and you live somewhere else, you have to kind of keep paying your taxes to the States.
So they kind of make barriers to exit too. There's not only barriers to entry, but barriers to leaving.
Oh, that's very, very common, especially in the States. Like, it's a lot of people don't consider that option because, first of all, they try to make it seem like the States is the best place. But also that, it's pretty hard to get accepted elsewhere. And the thing is, it depends on your level of country. Like, if you're going to like a first world country like Europe and stuff, it's a little harder. But if you're going to places like Bali or Indonesia or things like that, then it becomes a lot more easier, because the US passport is pretty high valued out there, right?
Okay.
So most recently, people are going to Mexico as well quite a bit. They're not immigrating there as such, but they're going and spending like 4, 5, 6 months there at a time. And it's pretty much easier to do as opposed to like just immigrating and uprooting and moving there.
Okay, so it kind of just depends, like, based on whatever the individual's purpose for immigrating, it could kind of, depend on how easy or difficult it might be.
But yeah, the few factors to mainly consider first is your education. Like, are you like a high-functioning individual? Because that's what other countries look at. Like, can this person like thrive here? Second is money. If you have good funds, it's pretty much comfortable. Like with some places a requirement, like with Canada, like I was coming in, I had to show at least like 15,000 in my bank account. Like,
so you have to be like stable. Like, you've got to show.
You have to show, and that's pretty much, those are two big factors, like basically education and this. And of course, it depends on if you have a family or not. Like, I was just a single individual, so I had a little bit more leeway. But if you're a married couple or if you're a couple with children, then those factors come into play as well, because then you need to have the money to support it, right? They don't want you coming in the country and you can't.
And needing social support.
Yeah, so they're like, okay, because then otherwise you will be using government resources to support your family, and they kind of want to limit that. They don't mind giving you government resources, but eventually they want to see that within a month or two you can get up on your feet and provide.
So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, just from what I'm hearing, but it's just interesting, in the U.S., we really don't have a ton of social support programs, and even the ones that we do have are so restricted that it's almost impossible for a lot of people to qualify, especially if they're working. But we also seem to have some pretty strict regulations for immigration and, having to prove that you can survive and things like that. And I'm just curious your opinion, I guess. It's interesting that the U.S. doesn't really have that many social support programs to offer if someone were to come in without the ability to survive. Does that make any sense?
It does, and it is a scary thing. Like, I kind of noticed this a lot, like during the pandemic, especially the first few months of lockdown, when you kind of really saw the social systems kind of crumbling. So the United States is really good in terms of, it's a pretty strong superpower, and people still want to come here. But that notion is now changing, because a lot of people come here and then realize that, like you said, it's not as hyped up as it's meant to be. You still have to work really hard and struggle really hard. And it's like the government doesn't always look out for you. That's something there. especially. And again, as an immigrant, you don't really have this option. Like, this is something that citizens can kind of consider. But as an immigrant, you come in expecting no help because most stuff doesn't apply to us anyway. Like, I can't take part in most of the government programs in the sense because, again, I'm not a citizen. So from the immigrant mindset, yeah, you basically come in and you rely a lot on the community of other immigrants around you. Like, if you're Indian, then you hopefully have like Indian communities who can kind of help you and guide you through stuff like lawyers, doctors, things like that, putting you in touch with that. Because otherwise, in general, with the States itself, it's really hard to kind of get your foot in initially, at least for the first like 5 or 10 years, like especially taking advantage of these services and stuff,
So when you're seeing people, I know this happened a lot during the elections when Donald Trump won. There were a lot of people who were saying, if you don't like it here, just move and things like that. Yeah. And they're just simply not realizing, like you said, 5 to 10 years is a good chunk of your life to become acclimated somewhere. It's not something that sounds like it can be really an impulsive decision whatsoever.
It takes a long time. And I kind of came here exactly when that left. So my entire stay in the States was during Donald Trump's time.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies from our country. We're not usually like this. I don't know.
We came in 2015 with all this vision. That was when he was campaigning, and then 2016 elected, and then it was like 4 years of just that. So like, wow. And it's now going to be a lot more. And that's why a lot of people are trying to leave as well. We kind of, at least like a lot of immigrants saw like policies change that were going to affect us. Not right now, but long term.
Now, I wonder too, it sounds like prior to coming to America, you had maybe more of a glamorized version of what it would be like. Would that be correct?
Oh, yeah. That's kind of what Hollywood does. It kind of shows you what life would be like. And I wouldn't say just America. Canada had the same impression too. Like, you usually just hear the good stuff because people don't talk about the bad stuff as much. Because the immigrant mindset is, the bad stuff you'll handle. Like, you just be happy because you have a lot of because the lifestyle here is pretty good. You get paid pretty well, at least in the States. The money kind of makes up for a lot of it, right? That's how the US functions. It's a sense of like, hey, we're paying you, so be happy. Everything else you can figure out yourself.
And that's a big thing. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah. I was done.
Oh, I was just saying that's a big attitude in the U.S., or just this big sense of you should just be grateful. And I think, and I obviously can't speak for society as a whole, but I think that in general we've kind of reached a breaking point of there's only so much pulling yourself up by your bootstraps you can do until you realize that this isn't working.
Yep, exactly.
So
a lot of my friends are also like now kind of, because there's been a lot of layoffs in the last month or two. Like, my LinkedIn is just full of like people getting laid off, and a lot of them are considering going back to India as well, because now they're kind of wondering if it's even worth like spending time trying to grow in the States when you can just go back to your home country and then maybe build something from there.
How did your parents feel about you leaving India?
They always knew, I would like to say. At least my mom always kind of knew that I was not like meant to be there in India. Like, growing up, I would always really fixate more on like the Western culture and Western communication. I wasn't really in touch with my Indian culture, which I'm trying to fix now, like in hindsight. Now in the last year or two, I'm trying to go back and learn more about it. But growing up, it's kind of like, for some reason, I don't know why, I didn't feel like I never fit in India. And then when I came to the States, I realized, I didn't fit in here either, but that's for different reasons. But basically, like, my parents were kind of, at that point, okay with it. And I'd already been out of the house for like 4 or 5 years by then. So I did my bachelor's in another city. So
okay, so you already...
Yeah. So my mom and I kind of like had a system where we stayed in touch and all. So I think I'm near.
I've kind of experienced something similar. I mean, I didn't immigrate to a different country, so it wasn't as extreme. But I did move from Maryland, closer to Washington, D.C., to the south in Georgia. And I went through, when I lived in Maryland, I went through the same thing where I didn't really ever fit in there. And where I am now, I really love where I am. I feel like I'm at home, even though it's not my hometown. And that's something that I've really been interested in for a while, the idea of home and finding comfort wherever you're at. So I wanted to ask you, how do you find comfort, and what gives you the feeling of home even when you're in a different country?
That's a great question. So for me, I think it's when you can just, most be yourself without that worry of like what people are going to think or people are going to assume certain things about you, that sense of just having that safe space around where you're like, okay, cool, I can be who I need to be. I don't need to walk around eggshells. I don't need to like rechange or change parts of my personality just to appease these people. I don't need to hold back anything. I can kind of, and it's getting harder to do that now in general. Like not just, even if you're in your hometown, it's getting pretty hard now to be who you want to be. But that's kind of what I would say, like pretty much in a situation where I might feel safe and comfortable.
Okay.
Expressing.
Do you notice that different areas sort of have like different mindsets or different personalities of their own, I guess?
You mean like countries and stuff?
Yeah.
Like countries and cities? Yeah, so in India, it's pretty strict out there right now. So you can't really, like people here in the North American states don't realize like, just the ability for you to go out and protest and talk about these things is a privilege in itself. Like in India, they can literally come to your house and beat you up if you say something against the government. And it's not like they're pretty good at silencing people there, and you don't really hear about it. But again, it's like there speaking out is a little bit dicey. You have to be pretty cautious, and especially with a lot of taboo topics like, mental health isn't spoken about as much, drugs aren't spoken about as much, homosexuality is still like a very uncomfortable topic out there, so here we've kind of progressed. But in the States, I feel more recently now, I've noticed like the United States don't really feel united as much. Like it's kind of different wherever you go. Like I've traveled quite a bit across the states, and every state kind of feels like they have their own policies, their own understanding, their own way they've been raised. And Canada's a little different. Canada kind of feels more like the same. Like most places are kind of similar in mindset. But in the States, it's like when I was in Boston, so that was pretty much a little fun place. But then, I was in North Carolina for a while. I went to the West Coast. And I was like, okay, cool. Like everywhere you go, you kind of experience a different way. And that kind of means you have to keep your personality in check a lot. Like unless you're someone who's pretty confident and unafraid of like being yourself, if you're someone who constantly has to check yourself, then moving across the states is kind of like, it brings that pressure in. Like you got to really be aware of like your surroundings and what people are going to see, because you don't know, right? Someone could just like do anything. You don't really know it.
It's true. That's very true. It's to the point where sometimes you see news articles that would have been shocking maybe 10 years ago, and at this point it's just kind of normal.
To be sensitized to it, yeah.
You are, yes. And I think a lot of people are trying to wake up to like these things are not okay. Where I live now, where I lived before was fairly liberal, and it was closer to Washington, D.C., but there were very rural pockets that still have white supremacist meetings, like really rural. Yeah. So, and it's interesting because it's only about an hour outside of Baltimore City, which, that's a nightmare in and of itself with a lot of their issues that they have going on. But coming to the South was a big difference. And I know, with you being in North Carolina, you experienced a lot of it too, where there's a lot of yes ma'ams and no sirs. And I feel like I need a dictionary to look up some different phrases because I've never heard them before. But it is really religious down here as compared to Maryland.
Oh, yes, of course.
And that was a big change.
Okay.
Up there, people don't really talk too much about anything. You just kind of keep to yourself. Whereas down here, if someone runs into you in the grocery store, they'll spend a good 45 minutes asking you about your life. So, it's been a big change. So I can't imagine going not only different states, but different countries too, because just in my travels, I've noticed those mindset differences.
Yeah, you've captured it pretty well, yeah.
So what led you to start sharing your journey and your experiences online?
A couple of different reasons. The first thing is, I kind of want a story like mine to be told because I wish I had it growing up. A lot of people didn't, not just the immigrant part, just like life in general, just being lost, not knowing your place and trying to find out where that is.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to start talking about it, telling it. And I've always been inclined towards the art. Like another thing with immigrants is, a lot of your life is not your choice. Like at least with India, I can speak to India in the sense like the things you study, your life partner, where you live, a lot of it is chosen by your parents in that sense and your grandparents. It's very much a system. Like same with my engineering degree as well. Like, I'm glad I have it, but at the end of the day, like I will always, it was never my choice to do it. I would have taken a little bit more artsy field. But I'm thankful to it because of that. I could come to the States, but overall, I realized in the pandemic, this is not something I want to do. Like, I don't really want to be an engineer. I don't want to be remembered as an engineer, if that makes sense. So I was kind of like, there was a dormant side of me that needed to be expressed. And I'm like, I need to talk about this a bit more, like the life what I'm going through. Because I don't really see that much representation of like first generation immigrants at all. Like, even now, if you see people, like, we are getting diversity in media in general, but it's mostly second generation immigrants as such, like people whose parents have come here and they have been raised here, most or less, right? But like the first generation immigrants is still, we've got a little bit more time to go before those stories become a little more commonplace and people understand like, okay, what immigration is like. And I'm just talking about like legal immigration as well. There's an entire section of like illegal immigration and refugees that still needs to be spoken about. So yeah, just wanted to share as much as I could about it, especially for people who are going through this, who can kind of like relate, understand, and be like, okay, cool, I'm not the only one.
Well, and it's been helpful for so many people, even outside of that particular, I guess, target audience, you could say. Yeah. For me, like I said, where I live now, it's Southern, and there's not a lot of open-mindedness. So, I have people that are debating with me maybe about illegal immigration. And I don't know how hard it is to get into the United States because I've never tried. So being able to hear firsthand what that experience was like can help open the minds of people that otherwise, would just be sitting in the dark kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So what would you say has... let me back up. I was reading one of your blog posts and it was talking about kind of like the pros and cons, both sides of the TikTok coin. And I thought about the idea of polarization and how, even you mentioned earlier with the United States, we're not really united. And this isn't just an issue that applies to the United States. People all over the world are really becoming polarized in their own little worlds because of the algorithm. What do you, I know you spoke more about the pros and cons in that article, and I'll link that in the show notes too, so that way people can check it out. What do you think are maybe some of the pros of the algorithm? I know exposure, but what do you think on like an individual level for people?
Individual, like pretty much this conversation right now is a huge pro, like because you didn't have an idea of what it's like, but then you got to somehow through the algorithm find me, and I was talking about this, and you were able to like understand to an extent what it is, right? So you have that thing of like, you basically connect with a lot of people as much as you want to, and this is TikTok specifically, but you can like reach out to people, talk to people. People get very personal, what I've noticed on TikTok. They don't really get too personal on any other apps like Instagram and stuff, but on TikTok I felt like people really just, and same with your TikToks as well, you really talk about moments in your life, like every day, that don't really come up in general, especially if you're, for instance, like I'm writing a blog article, like it's very clear, it's formatted, it's edited, like revised multiple times, as opposed to a TikTok where it's usually pretty quick, and if I go through something, I record it immediately, so it's kind of fresh. So the situation of that, like it's basically from mind to app is reducing, like the time between when you have the thought versus when you record the thought and people see the thought is reducing. So I think it's that element that kind of helps, and then you can really get like, oh, this is how people feel. This is how someone is feeling when they're leaving their country and coming to a new country. This is how someone feels when they're buying a new house. It's kind of, it really puts you in the moment as much as possible of what people are going through. And I like that aspect of TikTok a lot.
I would totally agree with you about how TikTok really has so much more authenticity than those other platforms. And I think that for a lot of people, and maybe this is just me, maybe I'm weird, but I think a lot of people, and I'm saying this from my personal experience, go around kind of thinking like, well, what am I supposed to do? Do other people do this? How do I adult? Like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And just seeing other people having that experience is comforting. And even though we talked about polarization and how, you know, it can kind of be negative when all you're being fed is the world you're already in. But on the flip side, when we talked earlier about having that comfort and feeling of home, I think having that community that is just who you are, you know, that is your community, can also be a good thing.
Oh yes, of course. You really find people who think like you quite a bit, and I like that a lot. Like, there's some people who have like, again, you know, the most common comment on TikTok is like, you know, people are like realizing they've never had like a unique experience because someone's like, oh, I've felt this exact thing, or oh, I've thought about this exact thing that this person is thinking through. So yes, it really does bring you closer and shows you that, okay, you're going through a lot of different stuff right now, but we're human at the end of the day. We all have these similar experiences that, you know, make us human.
So how do you feel, and I know you kind of already have, I guess, a target audience or a niche, but how do you feel about niches?
I'm not a huge fan, to be honest. I'm still struggling with it. Like, you know, it seems like I know what my niche is, but I'm still like struggling to make content within it. So I kind of just want the niches to be personalities. Like, you know, just I want to know what your persona is and if you can emulate that around your niche. So if someone talks about money, I'm like, okay, how is your money connected to the person you are? Because I kind of see people through that. Like, I'm like, I want to know the kind of person you are before I kind of listen to your thoughts about something.
I have been struggling too. I feel the same way though about the personality. And it's hard because I've tried. I mean, I have so many things I'm interested in, and there's a common thread through all of them, but it's really hard to like niche down, as they say.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, I don't know, I'm still on the fence. I'm like, should I niche down or should I just be myself? I'm still going back and forth. But as you can tell, I'm not a huge fan. I have different things to talk about. I have many aspects, so I don't want to just become one person in one thing. And
I know your TikTok, the bio, it says healthy lifestyle habits served with a positive mindset. How did you come up with that? What was your inspiration for that as your bio?
Oh, just interesting enough. Basically, I started trying to be healthy, trying to do things. Positivity was always something that I brought to the table. And I didn't realize I was doing it. It was mostly something that other people told me. Like, I probably thought I was very negative and stuff. But then, you know, in a lot of my work reviews and a lot of when people spoke to me, they kind of kept telling me that, hey, you're pretty positive. How do you be positive so much and stuff? And in my mind, it was just who I am. It was just me. Yeah. But I kind of realized, okay, I do have a way of like maybe having a positive spin on it. I try to like as much as I can, you know, find a positive way of looking at things, even though they're bad. Sometimes it's not good to do that, of course, but most times it is. And, you know, once I started like through the pandemic discovering like a lifestyle that was working for me, like, you know, I started like learning how to find hacks around waking up early or saving money or eating healthy, things like that. Like things I didn't want to do, but I'm like, let me see, there's another way of looking at it that I can kind of, you know, make
see if you can shift the perspective there.
Yeah, like find a loophole, find another way of like, shifting perspective of like, okay, I don't want to do it. Like the same way I started getting healthy in the States because I couldn't afford to get sick in the States. Like I got sick one time and ended up paying like $500. So I'm like, no, I just literally cannot afford
We're not doing this again.
Sick. So I'm like, I have to stay healthy. So that was my way of starting to be healthy there at least. So kind of in that sense, in that I want to kind of bring a little positivity and realize that, you know, you can still be healthy. Being healthy is not like the worst thing in the world, but there's like fun ways of looking at it.
I see what you're saying. It's really all about the way that you frame it in your mind.
Perspective, yeah.
And I know after... Exactly. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
On a perspective, you were saying before. Yeah.
I, after the pandemic, or when things started to kind of open back up, I hadn't been able to go to the gym in a while. And I, you know, after work, usually I would kind of, I'll do it tomorrow. I would just, you know, not really feel like working out. But after they closed, I realized, oh, this is a privilege. I get to go work out. And after the pandemic and after they opened things back up and I was able to go back to the gym, it was really an attitude of, I get to do this. You know, this is an opportunity versus, I have to do this.
I have to, yeah. That's a great way of looking at it.
I have also had the comment frequently about positivity, and I am one of those people that if someone comes to me and they're sad, I really try hard to cheer them up, but it's always like, well, at least your house didn't burn down today, or just like the most random of silver linings. But I think that it has really kept me going and has allowed me to look at failure as just a new opportunity or a new journey to try. What are some of the things that maybe you've noticed from having that positive outlook?
One of the things is that like the failure element of it is just like, learning to like enjoy failure, be like, it's not the worst thing in the world, whatever happens to you. I've also learned to kind of, some people don't enjoy the positivity too much. Like in situations where you say someone's down and you go and try to be positive around them, right? You have to be aware of like toxic positivity as well. Like when, you are positive, but the person really what they need is just to sit in their negativity for a while so that they can feel it and get over it. So I've learned like, okay, positive outcomes are not always the best. They usually help if you can have a good balance of it, but it's not in lieu of like avoiding those negative moments.
But understanding that those moments happen and being willing to kind of sit in that for a minute.
The bad moments make the good ones feel a lot better. Like if you learn how to feel through the bad ones, you'll really enjoy the nicer ones. And
that's very true.
Yeah.
So this whole podcast, my podcast, it's the Audacity for me. I created it because I had this desire to help people live life differently. You described India and kind of how your life wasn't so much your choice. It was sort of like, this is what we're doing, here's the plan, and you just kind of follow along with it. And I've noticed that obviously differently, but I've noticed that same kind of thing in the U.S., especially in more religious circles, but in general of, okay, well, you get married, you have 2.5 kids, you buy this nice house, you get this nice job, and that's just how it works. So what would you tell somebody that, has grown up with that idea, wherever it might be? What advice would you give them if they wanted to branch out and do something different?
Yeah. First thing is like, it's never too late. Like, just know, like, I'm someone who's restarting my life at a very different stage, but just know that, you can really change your life at any point. You control a lot more of it than you think, Second is like, don't take advice from people you wouldn't take criticism from. That's something I'm kind of like, that's my current affirmation in the sense of like, people will try to tell you no a lot. It's mainly, eventually you start to realize that the people telling you no are the ones who are just led to believe that lifestyle, and you going against it means that they are questioned themselves about it, Like a lot of people say this about marriage as well. Like, if you say you don't want to get married, but everyone before you has gotten married, right, in your generational family. So they see that as a thing of like their personality being threatened. So if you believe in something, if you really want to do something, if you trust you can do it, then go for it. But just know that it's going to have a significant period where people are going to ostracize you. People are going to make sure that they don't associate themselves with you, and you have to kind of be strong enough to handle that. But people don't like when you do things different from what society is, right? There's only like a very few people who can break that norm and get out. So, but the good part of it is eventually you will find your space, you will find your circle of people who are kind of supporting you, who are kind of helping you get through, who understand what you're talking about. So in the sense, yes.
So just looking for those kind of little beacons of light as you go along.
Yep, and don't give up. Like, if you're serious about it, that's the thing. Like, if the best way to change society is to first be a part of it. So, if you feel like the best way is to just say yes to everybody, but quietly doing your own thing on the side, that works too. That works for a lot of people. You don't have to go announcing your plans to everyone. You can just pretend to be doing something while you're really focusing on your dream, if that's what's important.
And I think a lot of times people will, there's different personalities, right? So sometimes it's helpful for someone to share their plans because it's motivating for them. We see that a lot with, if people are doing like a diet challenge, posting every day or something like that. Excuse me. But then for other people, like you said, working quietly and kind of just, I don't want to say keeping to yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, success in silence. What would you say to somebody that's kind of on the fence as to whether they should share their ideas or not?
Okay, so I think initially everyone will want to share their ideas because you have that confidence of like, oh, I can do it. So I would say go for it, because I think naturally what will tend to happen with most of us is you'll start to identify the people who are supporting you. You'll start to identify the language and the tone and the conversation of things like it. So when I first started, like when I left my job, I quit my job, I wanted to do content creation, right? So the kinds of questions I would get kind of would tell me where this person is. So every month I would have someone text me like, hey, are you making money from this yet? Are you making money from this yet? And I'm not, because that was not my intention at that point in time. My intention was just to create content and learn. So, but I could understand that, oh, this person only sees me as successful when I start making money. So I need to kind of reduce or change the way I talk to this person, because I am not going to live up to that person's version of what I want to do with this. You know, so similar, you kind of start seeing based on the way people talk to you and the tone, that, you know, you'll see what they think you're doing and what they expect. And you should try and avoid this, because that kind of gets into your mind and doesn't get out. You know, it may make you feel like, oh, I'm not as successful if I'm not making money with it, right? And that's not what you want. You're doing something because you love it, because you genuinely want to kind of learn something new, grow, expand. You know, money is obviously a part of it, but initially the idea is to understand and learn and grow. So you should surround yourself with people who are asking the right kinds of questions, like, hey, what did you learn from content creation this week? Or, you know, hey, how's your growth doing? Like things like that, which are genuinely like you're excited to answer. You know, not questions that put you on the spot and are kind of like, you know, clearly from people who don't understand the industry or who don't understand how to ask what you're doing, right? Because a lot of people initially, like 90% of people around you are not going to understand what you're doing. So telling them your plans is going to be more destructive than constructive.
I've noticed that too. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, pretty much. I'm saying like eventually, no matter what advice I give, I think most people will figure this out as they do it, because I did too. Like I knew all of this going in, but, you know, it really takes that experience to kind of understand that, you know, to succeed in silence, because eventually when you succeed, people will come to you and tell you succeeded, and then you will be fine. But by that point, you would have already been succeeding for a long time, so you don't need that validation.
Yeah.
Yeah, initially it's kind of like, take your time. You want to go, you can tell people you can. If you're on the fence, you know, do it, because eventually you will learn by realizing the backfire when it starts backfiring on you. Especially if you're starting out. If you're starting out, you can take the hits. Like it's good to take those hits initially, because you know, now I've learned to keep things a little bit more quieter. You know, don't talk about everything, don't brag everything. Even the same thing you said, right? People doing workouts and posting on Instagram. I feel that puts more pressure on me, because I would rather just in silence just accomplish my goals than, you know, post it every single day. Because then one day if I don't post, then I would feel like, oh, everyone noticed I didn't post today. And then if like 2 days I didn't post, everyone. So that kind of puts that spotlight on me, and kind of it's conflicting as to why you're doing this. Are you doing this for them to accept you, or are you doing this for you to grow?
So really examining kind of why you're telling someone before you tell them, and listening to your gut when it's talking to you. Because I've had that experience too with people who, you know, I thought might be supportive, but then the tone of the questions are, oh, so are you going to make money off of TikTok? Or...
Or you don't have these many followers yet, or you don't have this yet. So it's kind of like,
Well, and I've noticed too, and you mentioned this earlier, not taking advice from people you wouldn't take criticism from. It's very similar to one of the things that one of my affirmations, or, you know, whatever that I tell myself, is not to take advice from somebody that I wouldn't trade places with. And it's so easy, and I know that you've had this before, because I have it all the time, of people saying, oh, well, you know, it's so easy, like all you have to do is make a video. I don't understand why it's so hard. Or why don't you have 1 million followers? All you do is post videos. And it's like, well, have you posted any videos? Have you edited? Because it takes some time.
A number of times people have told me like, oh, this you just put on a podcast. I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm working on it. It's taking time to get there. Takes a lot of work.
Yeah, they don't consider, you know, the prep work, or navigating different platforms, or I think CMS or RSS feeds. There's a lot.
Just time to become, like, it took me like around 4 months to just be comfortable on camera talking, like making TikToks. Like now I'm super comfortable. That like just the process to get to a point where I can produce daily took about like 4 months of just pushing myself. I had to give like myself pep talks before doing something. You know, I would get like anxiety sweats and stuff. So it's a lot of breaking those barriers too, like not just the technology barriers, but your own personality. Because again, you have to put yourself up for criticism. You have to show your work and be open to it being rejected or seen or basically ignored. Like most of the initial stuff that you do will completely be ignored by people, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know how to handle that. So.
Well, and I think that kind of goes back to what you said earlier about your people will find you. It's just a matter of putting yourself out there to find those people.
Being patient and just waiting it out, yeah.
So we have talked about a lot. We've talked about immigration, we've talked about TikTok, and you've given some amazing advice. If there was one last piece of advice or big lesson that you'd want to leave us with, what would that be?
Let me think through.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
It's mostly you control a lot more of your life than you think, is what I would say. Like, it's currently what I'm going through now. I am in control, even though it seems like the whole world around me is burning. I'm actually dealing with a lot of like other stuff right now, which is kind of weighing down on me. But I have to keep reminding myself that, you are in control. Keep telling yourself that as well. You can change the way your life is. You can change, a lot. Like, yes, society is bad. Systems are bad. Competition is crazy. People are putting a lot of pressure on you. But in a large sense, you do have control to kind of change as much as you'd like. You just have to really figure out the ways of doing it. That's the hard part. Like, figuring it out is the hard part, but the fact that you can do it is always there. Like, it does exist within you.
Oh, I love that. That is a beautiful message to leave listeners with, is just you. And I truly, truly, truly believe that is everyone has everything that they need already inside of them. It's just a matter of really being able to look at yourself in your entirety, the good, the bad, all of it, and really fall in love with yourself. And that gives you what you need to go through with everything else. So I really want to thank you for being on the podcast and agreeing to meet today. This was such an educational conversation. I'm sorry.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, you had some very good questions. I was really happy to talk about them.
Yes, I'm sorry if I was putting you on the spot at all. But I'm just so interested in your story, and I know that my listeners will be too. And I just thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you as well. Glad to be here.
If you enjoyed today's episode, let's connect. You can find me on all the socials, but primarily check me out over on TikTok. You can also look at the show notes for links from today's episodes to connect further and to support and unlock bonus content over on Patreon. I can't wait to connect with you soon. Bye.